wanted, an open day on hostel night, said, "Ma'am, all 4 feet on the ground, we promise." And but there were other women who said, "This is one space that we think it's ours, and we don't need it. I mean, in class, in canteens, or at the dhaba, we're all together, but we want to let our hair down. We just want to come, sit tired, be ourselves, where we don't have to think about being women all the time. And so I want my hostel to be that space." So and these were feminists. So the feminist opinion was kind of divided on this. Also so I remember when I was a student, the entire battle was around, should gates be closed at. So there were instances of, in India and even on campus, some disturbing instances of sexual violence actually called for, even our wardens who, they sociologists and all, they thought perhaps it's safer, and they tried to explain to us, this is for your safety. And there was quite a rebellion where, women would come at 2 a.m. and the jockeyar would offer to open the gate for them, and the woman would say, "I'm sitting right here outside the gate with my boy. Run. What are you going to do about it?" So these were the, those little events and questions that we were struggling with. And I don't know how things really work now. What you said about the masculinist, it's also about control, and it's nothing new. And we found that control could often be exercised not by locking our gates at 8 p.m. but also through institutional responses to what people face in an everyday manner. So, I remember there was this one time where a case that today, our common sense today says this is sexual harassment, had to go to the proctorial body. And of course, because these bodies represent the university, there was the sense that we have to take care of both parties and essentially let it all simmer down and, paper it over. And, when more of these instances piled up, we realized that something specifically addressing gender and sexual harassment has to be in place. And then, then the conversations around how the institution should respond to what we face, those conversations started. On the other hand, of course, there were, from everyday life, like you said, we wanted to also understand our own situation. So there were a lot of small feminist groups who would organize readings, and people's own poetry would be read. There would be film screenings, and these were not. There was not a standard pattern which would help us understand all questions around gender. But people picked up, and popular culture was always part of that. I remember, at least when I was a student, people didn't use the term rape culture often enough, and today I find a lot of my male students also use the term, and it always surprises me, how nice. But to actually recognize it, and I don't know how it was for you, but when I was in my postgrad days, we didn't have the terminology through which to address any of this. But we realized that, very visceral responses to, let us say, Shah Rukh Khan's Kaunsi film thi Tum Aapkar Ya Na Kar. Yes. And then there was another, where is the stalker? That song. There's this stalker. Huh? Yeah, there's another. There's a film called Anjam. Anjam, yes. Right. Yeah. So of course these films were quite popular and had received fair reviews. And we realized that there were a few of us who were feeling uncomfortable, and we weren't able to decide why we were feeling uncomfortable. And of course, conversations around all these things that really started us off. Also, there was, for most of us when we came to JNU, it was, we are away from home, we are getting to interact with, people from other genders, and we are free to do so. Also meant that those interactions were not free of tension. And so negotiating that everyday aspect of life was also one big part of really asking ourselves, who are we in terms of gender, who are the people around us, and what is the basic minimum. So what we call consent today perhaps would have been called safe boundaries, don't step on my toes kind of situation then. And I've realized that this, why queer feminist is also, gender has different expressions. And there is, if your mindset is even minimally liberal and democratic, it's required of you then that you do not become the cause of repressing different kinds of gender identities. At least that is the first step. So in the initial stages, it was a whole concoction of popular culture, also of what is being taught inside classrooms. So, in fact, Pratiksha asked, how many of you start your course with a feminist degree? So, ask people who teach philosophy or sociology. You realize, even people who look at art closely, it's all the big names are men. Most theorists in our respective disciplines are men. And one of my colleagues and a friend actually posed this question after an important sort of discussion on campus that had happened after a major incident of violence. And the question is really what are we leaving in class, and how visible is the question of gender at all in class. It's not about women facing whatever it is at the hands of men. We no longer look at it like that. But really, when do we foreground the question of gender at all? And that's a question inside the classroom, that's a question inside hostels, in our everyday life. So the beginning of some sense of we need a set of principles that will look at our conundrums, and where we can't actually lay out clear black and white rules on how to interact with each other, but there is an understanding what this should be, and when those boundaries are transgressed, then we need something that is outside of us to, well again, not control, what is a better word, but to redress, as a redressal. And in fact, the conversation started around having a redressal committee. They were actually calling it, having a redressal committee. And then slowly we realized that the university can't be asked, the administration can't be asked to give us a pattern, a set of rules that would help us resolve, the sexual harassment in everyday life. And this required feminists, even of different points of view, to sit down and ask each other what is the basic minimum we can start with. And of course it grew from there, and not me, but people from different groups in this campus actually built a set of starting principles for how to understand sexual harassment and how to actually take up the question of redressal if something comes up. Also, the sensitization part of it was actually more important than addressing the strange legal quantity called sexual harassment. So it was everyday conversations in all centers. In fact, at some point, the JSCAT made it mandatory for all centers to hold an orientation where a lot of centers would grow, we have to do this, because their respective chairpersons would have to start it. And I've noted that when I was in the chairperson, I would write to all, when I was chairperson in JSCAT, I would write to all deans and chairpersons of individual centers, please hold your orientation programs. And only occasionally would I hear from one or two of them who would say, will somebody from JSCAT come and do this for us? Mostly I could hear these distant groans when people are saying, we've got too much on our hands. Now don't ask us to talk about gender because we don't even know how to. And the sensitization thing became really quite important, and we got a lot of help from feminist groups in the city who I remember there was a set of skits and programs where something like you must have heard that thing about tea, like in Indian context, yeah. Where if you have a guest and you offer them tea and they say no, then you're hardly likely to. And if and so if your guest is asleep, then you're even less likely to shove tea down their throats, and that's how consent works. So a lot of these really quick and easy to understand materials were produced for us, and people came and generously gave their time to come to campus, and it became really easy to see what was being meant, to understand that gender identity works differently for different people, what being queer means, and in fact, when questions were asked of us, I remember the earliest encounter with queerness was not because somebody stood up and said, I'm queer, but the questions that were asked of us. I mean, do you think of yourself as a woman 24/7? And what does it mean to be a woman or a man to you? And a lot of these questions that can, at first glance, seem disturbing and disorienting, because if somebody asks you, who are you? Then you give them your name, but that's your name. I like watching films, but that's what you like doing, but who are you? And these are disturbing questions, but I remember facing them all the time from friends, from faculty. So I found that some of what happens in class, some of what happens outside the classroom, some of what happens in this strange friction between people coming from different social backgrounds, it's actually an eye-opener for at various levels. In fact, this thing you said about shyness. Shyness actually is the first step also to curiosity at one level, but you said it's at least there's a space where you don't encroach. Well, class is an important aspect of I remember being told, oh, but you're from Bombay, what's your problem? You don't understand a lot of things that people face. And I would say that I grew up in a strict household. Even now when I go back, I have to be home by 10 p.m. I mean, it makes no sense, but this is how I grew up. And I thought, growing up a woman in a big city where I never went out to play, I never went out unaccompanied. And I thought growing up in a city was the most unfree way of living. And when I had this sort of thrown at me, you're from Bombay and what's your problem? I mean, this is privilege really as it comes. That's, these, sort of exchanging my place with someone else also taught me a lot about privilege and gender. And I realized also that it's thrown into this mix, the clear definition between someone from a Mufassal area who's a man and someone from an urban region, all these seemingly clear boundaries started to dissolve. And when all of this comes together, I think the first thing that is displaced is our own very binary notion of gender. Right? So when all the conversations that began happened around popular culture, classrooms, what people are feeding themselves, and other things. It was initially it was thought of as a body that is meant for women, and it will only address what women face. And in fact, when I became a person, I realized that the team that had worked before me, it had taken them a very, very long time to understand that a complaint that had come to them was not a complaint that would have been addressed better by a proctorial body, because it was a complaint that came from a man about several other men in his hostel. And that team actually teetered on the brink of sending it to the proctorial committee, because it took them a long time to understand how this was also happening, because gender has played an important role. So a way of exercising control, a way of demeaning, shaming, all of this was going on, and it was a different kind of experience to recognize harassment happening in a homo-social situation, like hostel. In fact, there was, while cases would come to us, we would have to sit people down and talk about the nature of friendship. Friendship, you can be friends with somebody and it's possible they don't want to be friends with you, and your goodwill doesn't mean that you have rights and a free pass to conversations, sending SMSs. The mobile phone is a new thing, and we had to explain to somebody that repeatedly texting someone is really violating their space, because they have no control over the message coming and dropping on their phone, and their phone is their space, and you can't do this. And it was bewildering for people who heard this for the first time, but over a long period of time, I think people have come to understand that the smartphone in your hand is literally you're holding a whole world, and that use has to be careful. So it kind of spreads to other aspects of life. How do we use social media? I believe stuff happens on the JNU page. I mean, I don't follow it, but I believe things happen. And there is a sort of concern on what are the rules that govern me responding to somebody's post on social media. What do I put on Insta? Do I need the consent of the person who was with me in that day to put something on Insta? I think today, with the different kind of media that we use, it doesn't mean that society has had that transformation, but at least some of us with access to media, with the opportunity to think and a kind of presence of diversity around us, I think it's become more, not easy, possibly because you're telling me that in Holi stuff happens. The other thing is, it's not a sending school thing, because I remember there were, this is a Holi thing, where even left activists, there was a thing of tearing off each other's shirts and having them dangle from trees, and no, it's a thing, no? It's still a thing, and to fling it into trees,
filled with torn shirts, and it's not a good sight to see, because
I'll give you the other side. So a friend of ours who was a well-known left activist, and he kept scurrying away from other men trying to grab his shirt, and when somebody at the end of the day laughed at him, he said, I can't do that, I don't have biceps and six packs. So this was the other side of it really, and we had to tell him, but and we got completely tied up in trying to strike a balance between why this tearing of shirts and hanging them on trees is problematic, but also him saying, but I'm not muscular, how can I have my shirt torn, kind of thing. That was also strange. But yeah, so
Johnny, but we have questions. I just read about this, by the way, and maybe there's someone who can say more. कि कपड़ा का गोली करके this is a tradition in some parts of North India, and I'm not sure, just because it's a tradition, there are sati is also a tradition. So tradition, it doesn't protect it, but I have a feeling there's also some kind of cultural gap between this very particular way of, if you look it up online, you'll find it. But obviously only men do it, and which means that that space is being masculinized and made uncomfortable for women. It's being made uncomfortable for men who don't want their shirts to be ripped off. So I don't know. It's worth looking at it more and learning it and understanding where that's coming from. It's not coming out of your right. It's not coming out of a particular school or something. It is something in us. Okay, no, it's a good question. Why? So I think the issue is that in an overall sexist society, which I think you agree that it is a sexist society, that overall sexist society, unless there is comfort among in that group, it is very intimidating and sometimes terrifying to see men take off their clothes. I think you have to understand where that fear is coming from, right? For women, where that fear is coming from. So if one group's enjoyment, after all I could say, I mean I understand what you're saying. Like supposing you say that we have a public, let's say we are drinking alcohol. I'm not going to talk about university space, but somewhere we're drinking alcohol on a terrace, let's say, of a housing society. So, in fact, this happened in my housing society. A group of friends were, including myself, we had a party on there. Now, anyone who lives in a multi-story building knows that the terrace is a common space. But the terrace is also used by the top floor. So this was the top floor house, so she had a party, we were drinking. And later the managing committee sent a stone letter, the alcohol was served very much. And we were all very shaken and surprised, oh my God, we didn't realize that. And then we discussed this and we said, oh, what if it was a bunch of men drinking on the terrace? How safe would, because it's I mean, it's a very broadly safe space. Women are walking on the streets and they're running inside the society. Girls are going for runs at midnight because it's, how safe would that be if a bunch of men were drinking in the parking lot or maybe. So I think you have to be aware that men's enjoyment, because this is a sexist society, can produce fear and can produce anxiety, can produce a sense of lack of safety among women. So if this has to be done, some kind of conversation has to happen before. That conversation has to happen before. So in fact, when Parnal was talking, I was actually thinking, what would be really interesting is that, okay, we know that GS Cash is gone, we have to try and get it back, we have to try and get India back, that's an old different story. But we have to try and get a lot of things back, including MPhil program, by the way. But which I think is absolutely crucial. And it's very depressing to have that. That's another discussion. But whether GS Cash comes or not, and ICC is very, very limited. We all understand that, we all know why. What we can do, and I think it would be very interesting if the students' union does it, is if you just set up a group of 50 people who will go and conduct random meetings in hostels, at Bangalore, at wherever, and say, let us develop norms for behavior on this campus, which are anti-casteist, anti-classist, anti-sexist. What would those norms be? So you have a group like this. 3 students from that group of entirely student group. Okay, what are the norms? And you come up with the 5 or 6 norms, including then these kinds of questions. So then what about us? Come to enjoy ourselves. Okay, how to enjoy yourself in such a way that it doesn't impinge on other people's sense of safety. So if you have a drive like this over the next, after now summer vacations, but at the beginning of July, let's say, or August, whatever, and you develop these norms, and then you just have 50 points, 25 points, right? And it's all over the university that these are the norms that we follow.